The reigning world champion is undeniably one of the greatest drivers that we've ever seen. He wowed the paddock with his blistering pace ever since he first stepped foot into Formula One, but Verstappen has also had his fair share of criticism, especially when he was younger. What were some hot-headed moments that got Max in trouble? How did he turn an entire country against him? Stay tuned as we count down the most controversial times in Max Verstappen's career. Azerbaijan, crashing Red Bulls. When Max got promoted to the Red Bull racing team alongside Daniel Ricciardo, it was always going to end in disaster. Max was a prodigious talent on the rise, and Ricciardo was still trying to establish himself as a top driver. In 2018, the team were way off the pace of Mercedes, and so had to fight for whatever points they could get. At the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, they were in 4th and 5th and edging closer to each other. On the main straight, Ricciardo was tailing Max and looking for an opening. He darted from left to right, and Max covered did the same. What happened next was team principal Christian Horner's worst nightmare. Ricciardo couldn't slow down in time and slammed straight into the back of Verstappen's car. Sparks went flying and both of the Red Bulls went skidding off the track. They were both out of the race. What looked like at least 22 points in the bag had turned into nothing, and they both had some explaining to do. Horner later said that they were both to blame for the accident. Many commentators pointed to the regulations that stated moving under braking can be considered an abnormal change of direction. It appeared that Max did move sharply under braking, but when asked about it after the race, he said, "I don't want to talk about it." I wouldn't want to talk about it either, Max. Monza 2021. This next one was just last year, but it was when tensions between Max and rival Lewis Hamilton were reaching boiling point. Max was just 3 points clear of Lewis, and it was getting to a stage where every point counted. The weekend was the second time that season that would use the sprint qualifying format. The sprint race on Saturday ended with Bottas in first, Max in second, and Lewis down in fifth. But it wasn't too long before Max and Lewis were alongside each other once again. It was halfway through the race, and Hamilton just made a pit stop. The stop was slow by Mercedes standards, and it meant that when he rejoined the track, Lando Norris was able to overtake him. But even worse, Hamilton ended up wheel-to-wheel against Max. They continued down the straight to see which one would yield. Predictably, neither of them did, and as they rounded the corner, Max went over a sausage curb, which bumped his car onto two wheels. It was almost an impressive stunt if he had meant to do it, but it ended his race prematurely. Good thing for Max that Hamilton was also out of the race, because the Red Bull had landed right on top of the Mercedes and beached them both in the gravel. Slow motion footage of the crash showed that the body of the Red Bull car would have slammed into Hamilton's head if it weren't for the protective halo system, and even still, he was left with a tire resting on top of his head. Max, that's not what your team meant when they said get on top of Lewis. Spin me right round. This year, Max is a defending world champion, who everyone regards as one of the best drivers on the grid. But a few years ago, he was still trying to prove himself, and sometimes that meant that he was a little too ambitious. For this one, we have to rewind to China in 2018. Sebastian Vettel had won pole with his Ferrari and was sitting pretty in third place. That was until Max came along. Max's Red Bull was charging just behind Vettel, and he was waiting for a chance to overtake. But when he tried to create a chance where there was none, he went head-on into the side of Seb's Ferrari. They both went into a spin and ruined Seb's podium chances. For the incident, Max received a 10-second penalty, but still managed 5th place. After the race, Max accepted full responsibility, but defended his driving style. He said that the problem was not him being too aggressive, but maybe he had been a little too ambitious. By the end of the race, it was Verstappen's teammate, Daniel Ricciardo, who stood on top of the podium. Famously, Ricciardo celebrated the win by doing a shoey on the stage, where he drank champagne from his race boot. That sounds like more of a punishment than a celebration. How did Max manage to insult an entire country? And who did Max almost punch after a race? Don't go anywhere, because all of that is coming right up. Fisticuffs in Brazil. Most drivers do their fighting on the track. Overtaking, outbraking, and pushing an opponent off the circuit is all part of driving aggression, but sometimes that spills over off the track too. That's what happened for Max Verstappen at the 2018 Brazilian Grand Prix. On lap 44, Max was well clear of Hamilton, who trailed in second place. He was cruising to victory when it all went terribly wrong. In Formula One, the gap between cars at the front and the back can be so big that they're lapped. When that happens, normally the marshals will wave blue flags, which means that the lapped driver should move to the side. Esteban Ocon, a young Force India driver, driver was the one about to be lapped by Verstappen, well, he never quite did. As Verstappen took his Red Bull in front of the Force India to pass through, Ocon tried to retake the position. Technically, according to the regulations, he is allowed to do this, but it was a little unnecessary. So, Verstappen passed briefly, Ocon tried to defend, and they collided. The collision wasn't too bad, but it was enough to send Max spinning off the track and into second place. He was furious, and it wasn't the end of it. Verstappen found Ocon after the race and confronted him. Max pushed Ocon aggressively again and again before they were pulled apart, and Max walked off. For his behavior, he received a punishment that included some community service. Time to give back. Political pressure. This next one almost caused an international incident. How did a radio message of Max's insult a nation of 3 million people? Well, it all started at the 2020 Portuguese Grand Prix. It was only a practice session, which is normally pretty uneventful. It's a time when drivers get used to the circuit and teams can finalize their setups. But this time, there was a pretty nasty collision. Racing Point driver Lance Stroll was ahead of Max, but Max was overtaking him on the straight. Coming into the first corner, Lance didn't see Max and turned sharply to take the turn. That caused the two cars to slam into each other, and Lance went spinning off the track. Thankfully, the damage wasn't too bad, but that didn't help to cool Max down. He was screaming over the radio, and it's what he said next that landed him in hot water. He insulted Lance by referring to him as a Mongol, and it was broadcast on television to millions of people. That caught the attention of the Mongolian government, who are a proud people with a history stretching back thousands of years. Mongolia's UN ambassador even wrote to the FIA to lodge an official complaint. Max apologized in a press conference later and said that he never intended to offend anyone. Red Bull team boss Christian Horner said that the comments were made in the heat of the moment when emotions were running high, and that he would be speaking to Max privately about the incident. A complaint from the government? Not many drivers have managed that. Abu debacle. The most controversial moment in Max's career by far was at the 2021 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. The race dominated the headlines for weeks, led to the race director being fired, and a changing of the regulations. The sport is still recovering from the moment that changed it all for Max. Throughout the season, Max had proven that he was a worthy champion. He'd gone head-to-head with Hamilton time and time again and won. He was made of world champion material. That was clear. But Max's first world championship looked to be slipping away for most of the race as Lewis built up a healthy lead. Then, in a dramatic twist of fate, a safety car was called after Nicholas Latifi crashed. Then the race director Michael Massey controversially instructed only the 5 lapped cars to unlap themselves, effectively removing the obstacles protecting Lewis. Max was then right behind Lewis and would certainly overtake him on fresher tires. The only problem was that the regulations stated that the safety car should come into the pits a lap after cars had unlapped themselves, and it was already the final lap. There was no time. Then, Massey sealed his own fate by controversially announcing that racing would resume immediately. In the end, Max won the championship. Massey lost his job, and people are still debating this outcome. Which moment do you find the most shocking from this list? And do you think the world champion has matured? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.